So back in November, I released a video talking about how I was kind of fed up with the scarcity around the PlayStation 5 and how I was just going to kind of forget about it and move on and play other things. Well, I was lucky in the sense that my wife didn't give up and actually picked it up for me for Christmas at retail price. She was able to find it at a Best Buy near us, and we went to pick it up shortly after the holidays. So as I've been playing the PlayStation 5, it kind of hit me, maybe now is the time to upgrade my television. And between Christmas and a couple weeks ago, I was reading a lot of reviews on televisions. Obviously, wanted to get the most out of both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X. And I did a lot of reading on televisions out there, what would be the best television to get, and watched a lot of videos, got a lot of recommendations, and yet I felt somewhat unsatisfied with the whole process. So I figured I'd come on and talk about, the tips that you won't hear for picking up a gaming television. Everyone out there with brand deals and various kind of influencer revenue streams is going to give you kind of one gospel after another, depending on how and from whom they're being paid. But I think, as my perspective has always been, the average consumer, person who's going to spend their own money and who is not going to evangelize these products, what is the best television for gaming? So I'll start off very briefly, talking about my setup. I was using in my man cave a Sony, I think it was a 43-inch X800D. It was one of their early 4K HDR models. And it was fine, but it didn't really do a great job of producing HDR content, and it kind of looked cloudy when it would kick in to HDR mode. So I figured, okay, PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X, capable of HDR, 4K gaming at 120 hertz. Let's get the best TV out there for that. So what I wound up doing is thinking to myself, you know what? I'm going to get one of the better LED televisions. And did a lot of research. Couldn't really find an LED that excelled at all of the gaming features for these next generation consoles the way the LG C1 did. And I wound up buying the LG C1 48-inch OLED television. Now, I had owned an LG OLED before. It was, I think, their early 55-inch 1080p OLED. And I didn't really like it for gaming because it had a very aggressive brightness limiting feature. And I found that when playing video games that had a lot of color, maybe an anime art style, or, watching hockey or something like that, whenever a bright white or a bright saturated lighter color would come on the screen, it would aggressively dim. So I really didn't want to go back there. But at the end of the day, the LG C1 really was the only television that gave you HDMI 2.1 on all four HDMI ports, and that supported 4K 120 hertz gaming. So I didn't feel great about it, but took the plunge. And I'm not really here to review that television. I'm just kind of give you the idea of where I went. So my takeaway from this whole research process hopefully can kind of be of value to somebody who's looking to make the upgrade. So here's the overarching tip. Here's what I learned. There is no best TV for gaming out there. There is no best TV out there. Every TV that you will research and that you can buy is going to force you into a series of compromises that you have to weigh based on your needs, your preferences, your room setup, and so forth. Now, if you're looking for a television for gaming, do yourself a favor, go on to ratings, rtings.com. They seem to be the lead outlet for TV ratings. You can also go on to AVS forums, Consumer Reports, things like that. And you'll notice how even the best and most expensive TVs have serious flaws. Look at all of the reviews, particularly on ratings and those other outlets, that talk about TVs with a dirty screen effect, with poorly implemented or non-functional 4K 120 support. So they'll say that they have these ports. They'll say that they have, HDMI 2.0 support, but it just won't work. And then, you'll have to wait on a firmware update. Look at TVs with bad response time, ghosting, ineffective HDR, lack of local dimming, lack of a wide color gamut on some of the newest models. Take, for example, the Samsung QLEDs that just came out this year. No, they have these, light blooming issues. Do the research and you'll see that there are no TVs that are good at everything. And that's just something you're going to have to take into account, as I think as you climb up the price scale, hoping to find that one TV that is great, you will just not be satisfied. So then the question that I had to face was, do I go OLED or do I go LED? And the common belief is that OLEDs are the best. They are the best televisions in all circumstances, but they're really not. Think about, as a gamer, what do you want? You want pop. You want brightness if you are going to play a lot of HDR games. Those are the strengths of LED televisions. Now, OLEDs do give you the inky blacks, and the feature that really stood out to me and that I've really appreciated on the LG C1 is great response time, noticeable improvements in response time where you sit down and all of your games feel very, very crisp. It's hard to explain, but it is that is a market improvement. But of course, with OLEDs, you're going to deal with the brightness limiting algorithm, and it's there on the C1. It's not as aggressive. It's not as noticeable as it was in my older LG OLED, but it's there. And of course, susceptibility to burn-in. Burn-in is real for OLEDs. It happened on my other one, although not in the kind of my main phase of using it. I've since kind of wall-mounted it in another room, and I use it as kind of a backup television. But using it as a computer and just kind of like leaving YouTube on, I mean, it is going to burn in. Now, they have implemented some other things. Most importantly, I think, is a screen shut-off feature where you can actually, instead of leaving your game paused, you have to get up and do something. You can shut the screen off. But if you get the OLED, you are going to have to deal with those things. You're going to have to treat it a little bit more differently than you would a regular LED television. If you do a lot of retro gaming and you want to enforce a 4:3 aspect ratio, that is not great for an OLED because you're going to wear the pixels in the center of the screen while you have the black bars on the left and right. But, it's going to give you those better response times. It has a nice color saturation where the fact that it produces a pure black allows other colors to stand out. But, HDR, because of the brightness limitations, it is effective. It's there. It looks nice, but it's still limited compared to what you get on an LED television. Unfortunately, there are no LED televisions that have all of the gaming features that the LG C1 has. So again, as you climb up the price scale, as you try to be a perfectionist, you're going to get hammered by these compromises. The next tip I can give you is ignore all of the nonsense about color accuracy. People saying, oh, well, you have to buy this television because it tests the best. It produces, this purity of this color or that color. The people who test for color accuracy, to me, they're measuring a very specific kind of output and reproduction. But, the TVs that they pick and more importantly, the settings that they proclaim may not be the most pleasing to you. So I had this experience of like, okay, if I'm going to go back to an OLED, let me really put in the best settings. And they look dim. They look washed out. So I think the best option would be to play around with televisions in a controlled setting. If, They have, if you go to a place that has a showroom, or if someone has a television, and you can play around with it, they let you play around with it. Don't let a series of overly technical test results determine your purchase decision. And I would argue, that vibrancy and pop and saturation are important, or even more important for gaming than how a screen, reproduces Rec 709 color gamuts, or, allows you to view the movie as the filmmaker intended. What do you like in a television? Do you like brightness? Do you like pop? Or do you like more neutral colors? And then let your preference guide your purchase decision. The other thing to take into account is, AV receivers haven't caught up by and large with HDMI 2.1 yet. So if you look around and you want to really upgrade your entire home theater, it won't necessarily integrate with the PS5 and the Series X. You add to the fact that receivers in general have become astronomically more expensive due to the chip shortage and some factory fires in Japan. And it's just going to add to your upgrade costs pretty significantly. And of course, there were some AVRs that launched with support for the new consoles, but yet had firmware issues and things like that. Now, there are workarounds. You can get a sound bar. The C1 has an optical cable. It can do eARC if your receiver supports that. So it's not really the end of the world, but it's not going to be that seamless plug and play upgrade experience that you might be hoping for. Now, the one thing I've found over the years buying lots of televisions, buying lots of monitors, I think the more that you spend, the more noticeable these compromises become, the more irritating they become. So, you know what? If your TV is more than 6 years old, pretty much anything on the market will be a significant improvement to you, even if it's not the elite television or the perfect television. Assuming you buy kind of a middle-of-the-pack television from a reputable source, Best Buy, Costco, things like that. Honestly, don't think too much about it. The C1 has been rated as the best gaming television by a lot of outlets. Is it? Yeah, probably, but the experience for me hasn't been night and day beyond my old television. In fact, I thought that the C1 would just kind of switch to 120 hertz automatically, and that's not the case. You have to activate that on the console side and the television side. So I was playing in 60 FPS, and I was enjoying it. I mean, it looked a lot better. Again, the old Sony did not do HDR well. But you know what? I could have just as easily picked up a Hisense on sale for $400 or $500, and I probably would have been pretty happy. And in fact, we had purchased a Hisense for a family member, HDR 70-inch set, and it was very impressive and has a nice screen quality. And it was maybe a little bit more than half the price of this OLED. So, again, if your television's old, whatever you buy is going to be an upgrade and is going to make you happy, so you may as well save some money. And my last point would be, if you are going to spend a little bit more, don't get into this kind of crazy image quality game. Shop size over absolute picture quality. For example, I have in kind of my main living room 126-inch ultra short throw projector screen, and it has pretty good input lag. It's not bad gaming setup from that perspective, but it really can't match an LED for brightness. It doesn't do HDR. It's 1080p, and of course the colors and black levels can't rival an OLED. Nonetheless, it is still very impressive to play games at that scale, and it's been really wonderful for couch co-op. Playing a game on there makes it feel special. And I think you could get the same effect if you replace an older 43-inch television, 55-inch television with an 83-inch TV on a Black Friday sale, even if it's not that top of the range. So it's just another thing to consider. And I think at the end of the day, TVs are a commodity product. We should treat them as such. You're not going to get the ultimate set, and spending a lot of money isn't going to get you, a uniform increase in quality. It's not the 80s and 90s where if you bought a Sony Trinitron, you were assured of a better television. Now, I'm not saying that I dislike the television I bought. I'm actually quite enjoying it, but I am somewhat of a perfectionist. I fall into that trap. So I like playing around with all the settings. I like finding what in my mind is the most optimal setup. Unfortunately, I think for most consumers, that is probably going to be more irritating than enjoyable. So the bottom line is assess your needs, your viewing habits, look for a TV on sale, and buy a TV that is comfortably within your budget. I would say the only thing you may want to look at is, if a TV has any ghosting or if it has just horrible response time. If it's just kind of a middle of the pack television, and it sort of meets all of those criteria, get it. And don't focus on finding the perfect screen. Focus on the content on the screen instead. I think you'll be much happier.